Hi, everybody, and welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds, the downstairs edition. I think we started upstairs, but we have found a comfortable spot and delighted on this episode to be talking with author Ann Jacobus. Ann, welcome to the show, and thank you for taking some time to talk with me.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, Jason. I was very honored because you interview very cool authors and artists. So
Oh, thanks. We try,
so
we try. And you are among the cool authors and artists. So this
well,
is
thank
this is
you.
very good. Absolutely. I'll mention the two titles that I know you for. I think that I came across your work through NetGalley. So Romancing the Dark in the City of Light being one of those, and then The Coldest Winter I Ever Spent being the other. So you have very engaging titles already. I think that was one of the things that I noticed. I noticed you wrote for sort of the YA audience, and then the title was just something that grabbed me initially when I discovered your work.
Oh, that's good. Titles are so important, and we're actually trying to work on one for my third novel right now, and it's hard because
Hmm.
they're but when you hit on the right one, it can make such a difference. Mine just tend to be a little on the long side, but
It
they
works.
are
It
good
works.
titles.
I
Yeah.
did write them down because I've had a teaching day and I wanted to make sure that I got every word correct there. So hopefully I did that. But fascinating titles and fascinating work. So curious about what drew you to the world of authoring and the written word.
I tell kids when I visit high schools that I was not one of those young people who knew from the get-go that I wanted to write books and be an author. I actually didn't start writing seriously till my 30s. But
Mm,
what I
mhm,
did know from a very early age was that I loved story. And and I was a very serious, voracious reader, maybe not voracious, but a good reader. And I loved theater and films. And if you had asked me, what would you like to be when you grow up? When I was like 13 or 14, I would have said a director. I wanted
mhm,
to
mhm.
direct plays and films. Well, if you write fiction, you get to do that. You are the director, you're the producer, you're the casting director, you're the prop manager, the location scout.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
I finally sort of got my wish, which has worked out well. And
You,
also being an introvert. Oh, sorry, I was just going to say that
oh, you're fine. You're fine.
writing and spending time by myself makes me very happy. Whereas I think if I really were working in the theater or film world, it would be harder, So
Yeah, yeah. You get lots of those moments of recharging, and you get to build the world that you want to build on the page.
so true.
Yeah, love it.
Mm.
So curious about how you step into sort of the young adult perspective and the way you think about writing for that particular audience. And I'll also say I know lots of adults that read young adult, younger people that read at sort of the edge of their experiences. So it's a wide range, but I imagine it's also challenging to step into that mind space.
It's funny because I think a lot of people, when they start writing fiction, they don't necessarily know who they're going to be telling stories for. Or a lot of us, when I first started, I assumed I'd be writing fiction for adults, and in
Hmm.
fact, I
Hmm.
have a couple of adult fiction manuscripts that will never see the light of day, thank goodness. But I think what happens is you find yourself gravitating towards certain characters as
Hmm.
well as certain stories, that these stories come up that you want to tell. And there there are ones that have more energy, and if you get better feedback on it, and this what happened with me on that was that um, characters who were from anywhere from 18 to about 16 tended to be a place where there was real, there were stories there. So
Hmm.
um, so that I feel like YA chose me versus me choosing YA.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
then, of course, as when you are trying to be in that space, clearly a lot is going to be coming from your own history. And I think a lot of children's writers remember their younger years and their teen years quite vividly.
Hmm.
I certainly do. I asked my husband, if he remembers something from like, elementary school, and he's like, I don't remember any of that. I think, gosh, I can remember everything, not everything, but a lot of stuff. Anyway, um, so you pull from your own history and your own feelings and what was going on with you. But I'm also fortunate enough to have had four young adults. They are now in their 20s and actually early 30s. But having them all be teenagers, that was another crash course in it. And I
Hmm.
would eavesdrop on them and their friends, not to get them in trouble, but just to listen to like what they were talking about and get the cadences of their, expressions and languages and a little bit of the slang. You want to avoid slang, but you still need a little touch of it here and there. And so would that's kind of how I would approach a YA story or YA characters,
Yeah, yeah.
on several fronts.
And having teens in the house, I mean, research at hand. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, I was going to say one other thing too about YA or even just writing for younger readers. Um, I've always, as I mentioned, that story was what I really loved. And while I love to read adult and I very much appreciate literary and fancy footwork with prose and all, I
Hmm.
do respect in YA that there is more of an emphasis on story. That anything that's going to pull a reader away from that story is kind of not going to be put up with.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and so that's one thing I very much love about YA. And then also that when you have younger characters, they are going to grow and change. I
Hmm.
think, I think a good story, you see some sort of change in the main character, something they realize, something, something changes. But with children's literature, you get kids figuring things out and really growing and there's also that optimism that we tend to have in stories for younger readers.
Hmm.
Even with the darkest subjects, it is still in the end hopeful, and all of those things are um, things that I really love. So
Hmm. Hmm. And you mentioned sort of the experiences that you've had and then taking on topics that are sometimes not easy to process. So thinking about the coldest winter I ever spent, just thinking about those experiences, themes, and ideas that you hope that readers take away. What is it that you hope that young people or even older people sometimes glean?
well. First of all, I would say I do tend to write around mental health themes,
Hmm.
and it is something else that's very important to me and that I feel strongly about. Um, and so there's several things that I feel like a good story that deals with mental health, especially now when it's still a difficult subject. It's still something people are not comfortable with. There's still a lot of stigma, although
Hmm.
there's far
Hmm.
less than there used to be. But that we have even more responsibility to our readers than, um, I mean, I think children's authors have a responsibility to their readers regardless. But when you're dealing with the subject of mental health, I feel like there's just a little bit more. Um, that optimism is really important, but so is honesty.
Hmm.
You have to be realistic about what's going. If you have a character who deals with uh, their mental health, first of all, it's ideal if it's not that's not what the story is about. It just happens to be one of the many attributes of this character that they might deal with anxiety, or they might even have bipolar disorder, or whatever. But that's just one thing they have to grapple with. It's not their main problem in life. And then you also want to try to model that they have support,
Hmm.
either from their family or the community or professional, and maybe, but at least one,
Hmm.
maybe not
Hmm.
all. Um, and that they are aware of what's going on with them and they cope with it well or not. Maybe they don't cope with it well, but they learn how to, and that they use the proper terminology,
Mm-hmm.
nomenclature, I believe is the word. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's what else? There's some other stuff. Optimism. Oh, when you really avoid tropes and stereotypes, which still are out there in the
Mm-hmm.
media, like that someone mentally ill is going to be violent, right? That's there. There are violent people who happen to be mentally ill, but someone who is suffering from mental illness is in way more danger of being harmed than someone else than
Mm-hmm.
harming someone. That's like such a stereotype that's so dangerous. Anyway, and so I got off on this whole tangent, but
That's
when I'm
very well
writing about
said. It's very well said. Yeah. And an
when I'm
important message.
writing about mental health is something I do feel strongly about, and I think it really enriches, my characters. I like to include it,
Mm-hmm.
and certainly in my first book, it was kind of it underpinned the whole story, and that the main character was suicidal and didn't really realize it until, or the reader also doesn't really realize it till you get further into the story. But it's so that's one thing would be mental health, and uh, and not just mental health to kind of help people understand it, but I mean for the reader, it's a chance for we talk about the windows and mirrors into
Mm-hmm.
stories. It's very much that, where a kid who maybe has a family member that has some sort of mental health issue, or they do, you know, here's someone else that has it, and they talk about it. It's not shameful. It's not secret.
Mm-hmm.
It's they're not alone.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and maybe in our best case scenario, and I work with another author, Dr. Nancy Bo Flood, who is a psychologist, and we
Mm-hmm.
curate a list of books. And we hope that, in the best case scenario, a child or a young reader, I should say, a teenager, she writes for picture books, but for picture book readers, that they would maybe um, find the wherewithal to reach out for help when they
Mm-hmm.
read a story where that's modeled and they see someone that is dealing with the same things they are in their family. And even if they're not in an area where um, mental health is discussed or dealt with, that a book can be such a hand
Mm-hmm.
out to
Mm-hmm.
them. Not a handout, but you know what I'm saying.
A hand reaching out. Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So
I really love that message of breaking down some of the stigmas, some of the stereotypes, because I think those are still so prevalent. And just what you said there about not being ashamed to reach out for help and not being ashamed
absolutely.
to have a support system. Those are good, healthy things to do.
Absolutely. And I've worked for a number of years in suicide prevention. Well,
Mm-hmm.
excuse me, off and on, really my whole adult life. But as you probably have heard, there is a real crisis right now. The post-pandemic with young people, there's a lot of there are mental health issues that didn't exist, and it was already kind of going up. But we do have somewhat of a crisis in our country with teenagers, um, and suicide is the second leading cause of death for kids aged 10 to 19. So
Yeah.
that's always sort of front and center in my mind when I'm writing for these kids, these young people.
Hmm. Absolutely. So curious about, you mentioned there's a third book on the way. So curious about creative journeys ahead and anything that we've missed on your work that you'd like to mention before we close out.
Absolutely. This is still in process, the story that I'm working on right now, but it is a ghost story thriller. So it's a little bit different than what I've been doing. And it's set in Arkansas, in a religiously conservative town, a small town. And I spent my formative years in Arkansas. I was born in Texas and grew up in Arkansas. So setting it there was fun and easy to do. Um, but it's got a ways to go. We haven't sold it yet, or it's not ready for public consumption for some time, I'm sure. And yeah, other than that, the coldest winter I ever spent just came out this spring. Um, but there's not too much going on until next spring with some librarian conferences and that kind of thing. Um, as I said, we do Nancy Beauflood and I do try to keep our curated list, which is just books that we happen to get our hands on, but that deal well with mental health, and keep that list. And it's available at my website. And if anyone would be interested in that, I welcome them to download it. Everything that I do on mental health is available and free for the taking. So
Great, great. You anticipated my last question or remark, which was websites that you want to mention. So we have the website. I'll make sure that that's in the podcast description and that it also pops up on the video. So glad to share your URL as well.
excellent. Yeah, I don't think I guess the only other thing, maybe I would just mention that the coldest winter I ever spent, um, because I worked on a suicide hotline for so many years, the protagonist is a suicide hotline volunteer,
Mm-hmm.
with her own somewhat troubled past, but she's doing great. She lives with her aunt, and she's coping very well and is on a roll with a bright future ahead of her until
Mm-hmm.
until life happens, right? Which
Right,
is what we
right.
have to do to our poor characters, is make things very difficult for them. So
And then show their reaction
that's
and
right.
growth. Yeah,
And growth. Yes, exactly.
yeah. Well, Anne, a pleasure to share about your work, a pleasure to talk with you, and glad to talk with you anytime. Thank you for taking some time, and thank you also for going to the trouble to find the spot in the house where
Oh,
Wi-Fi works
sorry.
best and all of those things. I appreciate you and glad to share.
Thank you so much, Jason. I really appreciate the invitation and having the chance to talk about all this. And I very much admire the work you do, and with all the authors and artists you speak with. So
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure, truly a pleasure, and glad to have you back anytime.
thank you so much.